Alright, so in this video I'm going to review how to multiply and divide fractions, and we're just going to do it with some numbers first before we start throwing in all of the variables. So to multiply two rational expressions, we're going to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators straight across. So if you've got a over b times c over d, that's equal to ac over bd, okay? So in terms of operations with fractions, that's the easiest one we've got. Just multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. To divide two rational expressions, we're going to multiply the numerator by the reciprocal of the divisor. So as long as b, c, and d aren't 0, if we've got a over b divided by c over d, that's the same thing as ab times d over c, right? And then of course we can proceed with a multiplication from there. Okay, but you have to take the second fraction and multiply by the reciprocal, right? And one of the ways that I tend to remember that, like if I'm dividing, like let's say I just have not even a fraction, just something like 2, and I'm dividing it by a fraction of 1/2. How many 1/2s are in 2? Well, there's 4, right? How do I get that number 4? Well, I take the 2 and I have to multiply it by 2 over 1, right? And that will give me the 4 that I'm looking for. Okay, all right. So just a little, if that helps, just thinking about some quick numbers there. Okay, now, so let's practice this a little bit before we start getting the variables involved. If you have something like 5, 6 times 3 over 10, now, if you multiply straight across, that gives us 5 times 3 is 15, and 6 times 10 is 60, right? And 15 goes into 60 4 times, right? So we have 1/4. Okay, so if we just follow the straight up rule, we can do that, right? We get a fraction and we reduce it. But sometimes, depending on how big the numbers are, that's actually a little bit more difficult than just looking at the factors, right? Because when we start getting the algebra involved, that's what we're going to do. We're just looking at the factors. So I'm going to look at this down below here. 5 over 6 times 3 over 10. And a lot of you may notice, okay, well, 5 over 10 is just 1/2, right? And 3 over 6 is also 1/2. And so in the numerator, we're left with 1, right? It doesn't just go away. We have 1 there. And then 2 times 2 is 4, okay? So that's one way to think about it. So you can also think about it in terms of factors, right? 5 over 6 is 2 times 3, right? Times 3 over 2 times 5, right? And with multiplication, we might as well just do this, right? We're just multiplying everywhere. And if that's the case, if we're multiplying everywhere, we can start canceling out all of those factors of 1, right? So we end up with 1/4. That way, 2 times 2 is 4. So I'm just wanting you to think about the factors of each of those numbers, right? Let's do this other multiplication example when we have 4 times 7 over 4 times 1/2. Remember that 4 out front that we're multiplying? You can write that over 1. 4 over 1 is the same thing as 4. So you're not multiplying that 4 times the numerator and denominator. You're just multiplying it times the numerator, right? And again, when we're multiplying straight across, 4 over 4 is 1, right? So we end up with 7/2 here, right, when we multiply everything out. And once again, you could just multiply straight across here. What would you end up with? Like 28 over 8, right? And then you could reduce from there. You'd still get 7/2. But really be thinking about those factors of 1 that you can cancel. Okay, so down below here where we have 10/9 divided by 5/3, we're going to change that into multiplication, right? 10/9 times 3/5, right? When we multiply by the reciprocal. And then I see, okay, well, 10 over 5, that's 2. And 3 goes into 9 3 times. All right, so what does that leave us with? 2/3, right? Okay, so always be thinking about those factors. All right, then over here we have negative 7 over 11. And we're dividing that by 14 over 1, right? I just want to reiterate that. When we've got a whole number like that, it's really over 1. So to change that into multiplication, we would have negative 7 over 10 times 1 over 14, right? Okay. And 7 over 14 is 1/2, right? And so we end up with -1 in the numerator, and in the denominator 10 times 2 is 20, so -1 over 20. Okay, here again, you can multiply that out and you'd have -7 over 140, and then you could reduce from there, and it certainly works, but I just want you to be thinking about those factors early on. What are the factors of 1 in there that we can get rid of?